Which meme spec should you play in TBC?
Alright guys, my name is Goblin, and today we're going to be discussing whether you
Killing that gruel, you know, just right at the beginning. Classic. You gotta get that tier 4 leg token.
should play a meme spec in the Burning Crusade. So what do I mean by a meme spec? Well, a meme spec is a term the community has come up with to describe very niche specs from classic WoW that don't perform powerfully in a competitive raiding environment compared to other classes. But you'd be happy to know that many of these meme specs become more viable when the Burning Crusade is released. So I thought I'd make this video to discuss just how viable they actually are, since to be honest many of them only become a strong spec in the later raid tiers. And also to explain what your life is going to be like as one of these meme specs, where you have to spend extreme amounts of gold to get certain weapons to make it competitive with other DPS. Will you find it to get a raiding?
I heard that Balanced Druid is actually very strong in TBC, and Shadow Priest is definitely very viable because you're kind of like a mana battery, so you are giving mana to everybody who's in your group, so your healers are going to be kind of thankful.
Guild and, you know, stuff like that. Just before we jump in guys, please consider subscribing to the channel if you want to keep up to date with subscribe to the channel, so do consider subscribing because that really does help out. First of all, I'm going to talk about the Rep Paladin, since it's one of the most talked about specs. The first big question people ask is, aren't Blood Elf Paladins better than Alliance Paladins? The answer is yes. A Belf Paladin will do about 200 more DPS than an Alliance Paladin, but only...
Which is a lot. If you consider it, Elemental Shaman at the top of his game is gonna be dealing like 1400 DPS, and Enhancement Shaman is gonna be dealing approximately 1200 DPS, which for many people it might not seem like a lot, but for this mid-maxing culture it is a lot actually.
Only in very later raid tiers when you're absolutely decked out in gear. In early raid tiers, the DPS is fairly similar,
True.
Although Blood of Paladin are slightly better because with Seal of Blood they will get mana regenerated through the Spiritual Achievement passive ability, since Seal of Blood causes a moderate amount of damage to the Paladin. Plus the Blood Elf Rail Shields do give you some extra mana too, and they're really good. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter that much. Every raid group would benefit from having a Rep Paladin in the group to refresh Judgment of Wisdom and Light, which provides loads of mana for the raid and a little bit of cheeky AoE healing. So people aren't going to ignore a Rep Paladin for their raid guild just because that guild is on Alliance. It's just not going to happen. Every raid guild will probably bring at least one Rep Paladin. Having more than one is like obviously a little bit less useful. Many raids probably won't do that, unless your guild can't get enough, you know, paladin buffs from their holy and protection paladins.
There's definitely gonna be a room for the Red 3 Paladin because of his utility that he's bringing, but it's not gonna be like you're just gonna have 5 Red 3 Paladins. You can do it in Wrath of the Lich King, but in TBC, not so much. You can just take another Warlock or Hunter for DPS.
You probably will find it pretty difficult to get a raid group, to be honest, simply by the fact that there is probably only going to be one spot. But then again, it really depends on what it's going to be like, because I think a lot of people do want to play Rep Paladin when it launches, so a lot of people are going to be playing the class, but the guilds will probably only take 1 or 2 Rep Paladins, so that is just something to consider. And when it comes to...
Anyway, you can always just respec to Holy Paladin and Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin is actually the best AoE tank, and as a main tank it can be viable, but I think at the end Feral is gonna be a little bit better with threat and with the damage mitigation, but the Protection Paladin can be definitely viable.
To get into a dungeon group, any melee class really struggles to get into a dungeon group in the early raid tiers because melee DPS don't do as much DPS as ranged DPS in tier 4 raiding. But are they any good though? And yeah, they are actually one of the highest DPSs in the early raid tiers. Well, when it comes to melee DPS, they are probably one of the highest. They easily do as much damage as a rogue or warrior, although you will have to go through the effort of crafting the blacksmithing axe Deep Thunder, which is a stupidly powerful weapon for a Rep Paladin because it's a 3.8 second weapon speed, which means the highest possible damage number is very high, and Seal of Command and Seal of Blood are based on weapon damage. However, in the later raid tiers, the warrior and the rogue will take over DPS on you, but in the early raid tiers, and honestly, if you really nail down your gameplay, you can very easily give warriors and rogues a run for their money. We'll also need to stack a lot of mana.
Also, Enhancement Shaman is gonna be very powerful, but Enhancement Shaman is more broad because of his utility, because of the totems, and obviously you get Heroism and you get Bloodlight, so that's the main reason why Enhancement Shaman is broad. But his DPS is also quite comparable to Warrior and Retribution Paladin. He's comparable, but obviously not the best.
Mana potions and dark runes if you can, since the Spec is very mana hungry, and if you run out of mana your DPS drops by a large margin.
That's why it's better to be actually Blood Elf Paladin, because if you're using Seal of Blood, for each melee swing that you are doing, you're actually losing your health, and then healer can just give you like renew, and for each heal that you got, you're basically getting mana back, because there is spiritual attunement talent, or the ability that you have as a passive, so when you're getting healed, you're getting actually your mana back.
Another great thing about playing a Rep Paladin is that you get absolute priority over all the fat two-handed weapons that drop in raid, since no other DPS can actually make use of them except an arms warrior, but most warriors play Fury and just roll on two-handed weapons for PvP, so you get over two-handed weapons, and that's pretty Bob's your uncle. When it comes to PvP, they're not a top tier class like a rogue or a warrior, but will still be pretty powerful. Next we have a Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin becomes way more viable in TBC. They have much less mana issues due to spiritual attunement, which means they generate mana whenever they are healed. They have more AoE abilities to hold aggro, like Avenger's Shield. They have a cleave taunt ability called Righteous Defense on a very short cooldown. So overall they're a very viable tank for dungeons and raiding, and their value increases over time during the expansion. They're also very extremely desired for dungeons because of their AoE threat, which is by far the best in the game. This allows
for 5-man dungeons, Protection Paladin is definitely gonna be in the highest demand, because obviously you got so many packs there, and it's just gonna be a really smooth run. As I am saying, in the end raid content, Sunwell Plateau, Black Temple, Mount Hyjal, I think it's gonna be like so definitely you can kill everything, but I think that Feral is just going to be, or Warrior is going to be having a little bit easier time because of damage mitigation, but still at the same time you can be just having two tanks, like in Warlock, where you have the main tank who is just basically for the tank, for the bosses, and then you have the AoE tank. So definitely viable Protection Paladin.
For DPS to actually have fun during doing dungeons and stuff like that, because they can actually do their AoE DPS and get the dungeons done much faster. Honestly, I've played Mage quite a bit in TBC, and being grouped up with a Warrior tank or a Druid tank is actually painful, because I can't do basically anything, and I can only do like single.
You just had a bad Warrior or Feral tank, and it's actually quite hard to find a good tank nowadays. That's why whenever I play, I prefer to actually be the tank, because when I am the tank, I just know that I'm not gonna mess up, because the tank is the keystone of your dungeon. And what you gotta do in TBC, threat is still an issue, the same as in Classic. So what you gotta do is that you gotta be tap targeting, tap, and you gotta be spamming Heroic Strike and Sunder. In TBC, you're not gonna be using Thunder Armor, but you're gonna be using a new talent called Devastate, and Devastate is actually applying Thunder Armor, but at the same time it's giving like one melee swing. So you're gonna be tap targeting and Heroic Strike with Devastating, and you just gotta keep it on everybody, and then you're gonna be thunderclapping with demoralizing shout, and in that case you should be able to hold the aggro. And obviously if some mob gonna slip up, then you gotta be using your taunt, and the DPS, the melee, the caster DPS, they have to be switching the targets. They just cannot be pushing one mob, because obviously he's gonna be pulling the mob. If you're gonna be focusing on 10 mobs and he's focusing on one mob, obviously Warlock is gonna pull it. But otherwise I don't see an issue. You just need to find a good tank.
Target damage. Next, let's cover the Shaman specs. First of all, the Enhancement spec. So Enhancement gets a significant boost in DPS
Very
in
viable.
the TBC, particularly if you go through all the effort of crafting the blacksmithing weapons at Dragon Maw and double up on them. They have a proc chance to increase your haste by 212 for 10 seconds, so they have really good synergy with Wind Fury spec. Sorry, Wind Fury weapon. On the topic of Wind Fury weapon, the totem provides the most useful DPS boost to other melee DPS in your group. On top of this, you will have Bloodlust and the talent Unleash Rage, which increases the attack power of your party members. Overall, the Enhancement Shaman is a very valuable addition to any melee group. However, in the early raid tiers, melee DPS are nowhere near as good as range DPS, so most raids will probably only run with one solid melee group, which means most raids will probably only want to bring one Enhancement Shaman, but in the later tiers...
But you can still go Elemental Shaman, and Elemental Shaman very, very viable. But obviously it's gonna be a little bit harder for you to get the gear, because you're gonna be kinda competing with like mages and warlocks, and that's kinda, you know, it's kind to get the gear as the clothy. But when there's gonna be dropping some spell power, damage spell power, leather gear and mail gear, then you can actually get it kind of easily. So yeah, Elemental and Enhancement Shaman, they are both very, very good choice.
They may want to bring another, so bear that in mind when it comes to getting a raid spot. In PvP, they're also on a similar playing field to a Ret Paladin, not a top tier class, but still pretty good. Yeah. Moving on to the Elemental Shaman. Elemental has a little bit of a better time than Enhancement Shaman when it comes to overall DPS and getting a raid spot. Since most raids will stack range DPS, it's good to put an Ele Shaman in the group for Bloodlust and the Totem of Wrath too, which provides an extra 3% hit and crit for everyone in the party. Since the Elemental spec provides better buffs to a caster DPS, you probably see, you know, at least like 1 to 3 Elemental Shamans in a 25-man raid group. Overall, Shamans are always stacked quite high in a raid group because of Bloodlust, which can be used multiple times in a fight. Now let's talk about Shadow Priest, easily the most powerful support class in the Burning Crusade, and overall probably the most useful class to bring to any raid, in all honesty, but that's only my humble opinion. They are always in high demand because of the amount of support they provide, and because not many people actually play them, so you won't have difficulty getting a raid spot, or you know, just put...
But I think you will get difficulty to getting the gear a bit, because as I said, you're gonna be spell damage class, and you're gonna be competing with mages and warlocks, especially warlocks. So it's gonna be a little bit harder to gear yourself up, but definitely very viable, and you're gonna have a safe spot in the raiding environment.
Bugging a dungeon spot. Their DPS is pretty good, but DPS isn't the most important thing about a Shadow Priest. The off-healing, mana regeneration and the debuffs they provide are absolutely invaluable. To put it in perspective, with Vampiric Touch, a priest can very easily return a warlock's entire mana pool throughout the course of a raid fight. So if you're in a group of a Shadow Priest, you essentially have 2 mana pools. So you can probably imagine why that is such a significant damage increase.
Also for a warlock is really viable because you don't have to be mana tapping so much, and I think Shadow Priest, he's actually regenerating also your health but also mana actually, I think,
for the raid. In PvP, again, not a top tier class but still pretty strong. Next we have a Druid specs, beginning with the Feral Druid. Overall very strong DPS and provide a good amount of support with their leader of the pack buff that gives
the top tier tank. Feral Druid, a top tier tank.
Party members 5% crit, and an improved leader of the pack that provides healing to the party members whenever they crit. So that's pretty cool. What most Feral Druids do is play a little bit of both when it comes to cat and bear form. You will be needed as an extra tank on certain bosses, and it's also useful if you can tank a dungeon, since it will be easy for you to get gear and find a group in the first place. Tanking as a Feral Druid is also very valuable. Very viable. You won't find it difficult to get a raid spot as a Feral Druid, in my opinion, especially if you can, you know, have the flexibility to be versatile. As a cat,
you have a Battleress, very viable, and you can give Innervate, very viable. So you're at this, even in these 2 points, you are actually having much more utility than, for example, Rogue, because you can actually just help healers. Plus you have also you can be buffing, so very viable Feral Druid.
In PvP you're pretty strong, but honestly not good as a rogue. but obviously Feral Druids are like the ultimate best flag carrier, so for BG pre-mades you're in very high demand on that front. Next we have the Moonkin. They become a much more viable DPS, and they also provide very useful debuffs and buffs, such as a 5% crit buff, 2 spells, an insect swarm that reduces the chance for the boss to hit.
I actually heard that Moonkins are very viable, but with the legendary stuff, that after that they are becoming like machines.
The actual tank, which relieves some pressure off the tanks. But the demand for a Boom King when it comes to raiding is probably the least on this list, to be honest.
Yeah.
Since Elemental Shaman provides near enough the same buff as a Moonkin, they also provide totem buffs and bloodlust.
I think every raid leader, if he had a chance to pick between a Moonkin or Elemental Shaman, he's gonna be picking, unfortunately, the Elemental Shaman just because of extra bloodlust. Ideally, you want to have 5 Shamans, so Shamans are gonna be in the highest demand. It's just, it is what it is.
So, something to bear in mind. Technically, the crit buff is 2% more for the Boomkin, but overall, an Elemental Shaman does provide more support value to a raid. In PvP, they aren't very common at all. I think it's mainly because they have to hard cast to deal any decent DPS.
I think in PvP, if you want to be just viable, just go Restoration Druid, and they are actually very, very viable in PvP arenas, battlegrounds, and all this type of stuff. Restoration Druid, very, very strong.
Lastly, I'll cover some pretty extreme meme specs very quickly. First of all, the Smite Priest actually do decent DPS as much as Shadow Priest in early raid tiers, although they obviously don't provide as much support. Arms Warrior will do as much DPS as a Fury Warrior in the early raid tiers if you get a fat two-handed weapon, but Fury will take over in tier 5, and they're also pretty useful for the debuff that they provide, which increases raid melee damage by 4%. Arcane Mage actually quite viable if you get a tier 5 set bonus, and it is actually the highest DPS spec when you have that bonus.
Yep.
Two-handed Enhancement Shaman, just a more of a niche kind of battleground fun spec to mess around with.
Everybody prefers just one-handed and one-handed Enhancement Shaman because he has much higher chance to proc Wind Fury, so you're gonna be having much more consistent damage when you're going to be, for example, dealing with trash and all this type of stuff.
If you get Looker procs, it's actually pretty good. Warlock Tank, used frequently for certain raid bosses. Shockadin is shocking, really bad DPS. Spell Power Rogue was actually a result of a private server bug, so it won't be on live servers in Ability Crusade, it only works in Classic. And lastly, we have a Survival Hunter. It's not necessarily a melee hunter, but you may bring a Survival Hunter because of the raid debuff that it provides, which increases the attack power of all attackers, and that's actually pretty useful. Anyway guys, that is the end of the video.
For last, please just go to the description, click on the link that is going to the original video, and leave a like and subscribe to Metagoblin. Also, please leave a like on my video, comment, and subscribe to my channel as well. I really appreciate it. It really helps the algorithm, so please just do it. It really helps me a lot. Thank you for watching this video. Very, very, very interesting video, and Metagoblin has providing a lot of very useful information for TBC. I'm playing TBC currently, so I can approve all of his points. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.